buying an apartment is not always a bad thing. It's what suits your needs and what does the job for that particular time. Buying an apartment now could make it a little bit harder for you if you're hoping to use the equity from that property. Good day everyone, it's Tony here from the Mortgage Agency, and thanks for joining me in another episode of the Mortgage Chat. Now, I came across a very interesting article the other day written by Miss Nila Sweeney from the Financial Review, where the title itself wrote, "The Apartment Trap, Why a Unit May No Longer Get You a House." So this is a very interesting article, and you're probably thinking, what does she mean by that? Well, let me break it down for you a little bit. And this is what I've been telling my first home buyers that's looking to get into the market. Let's say, for example, on the 70s or 80s or even the 90s, your parents bought an apartment because houses were just too expensive for them back there. And what they saw during that time was the growth rate with apartments and houses actually grew about the same speed. What Nila was referring to on the article is, right now, the growth rate on apartments is not actually going at the same rate as houses. Back in the 70s or 80s, it was actually easier for them to upgrade to a new home because the apartment actually grew in value. And that's why there was equity built up, which made it a little bit more easier for them to purchase a house. But the problem as of late, let's call it 10 years, the last 10 years, is apartment prices hasn't really grown that much. And houses actually grew substantially faster than apartments. And because they were able to buy an apartment first, let that grow, and upgrade to a new home, they're actually advising their children to do the same thing in the current market because it's actually happened to them and they actually achieved upgrading from an apartment to a house. But this is the problem we've had probably the last 10 years. Apartment prices actually hasn't grown that much, while houses actually increased significantly. Therefore, the gap on capital growth was actually widened by a lot. And I'm going to give you a quick example through RP data. And I'm just going to use Rouse Hill as an example. Looking at a 5-year trend, median unit prices back in March 2019 was around $700,000. While now, 5 years later, the median unit prices around the area is actually $660,000. So the prices actually went backwards around that area. Now, with houses around Rouse Hill area, back in, let's call it March 2019, average house prices was actually just under $1 million, and let's call it $980,000. But as of today, the median house price is actually around 1.58. So already you'll see there's a massive gap in between the growth of apartments and the growth of houses. So as a first home buyer, if you purchase an apartment in Rouse Hill back in 2019, hoping there was significant growth for you to upgrade into a house, well, I just showed you there's a big gap in between the growth of an apartment and on a house, where a house actually costs $600,000 more in comparison to 5 years ago. While if you bought an apartment 5 years ago, your prices actually went backwards. So that's what Nila was referring to, the apartment trap. And I'm just going to use Sydney as an example. Not all apartments in Sydney are bad or no growth and doesn't give you the opportunity to upgrade to a house down the track. But I think the opportunity to do that has diminished a lot. I do feel there are certain areas where apartments will still grow in value, but I think that's a needle in a haystack in a way. So I'm going to give you an example where I had a client that purchased an off-the-plan apartment back in 2021, where she purchased it for $890,000. It's just completed building at the start of 2024, and we had a valuation on it where the valuation came back at 1.1 mil. This is the actual first time I've seen an apartment that has increased in value for off the plan in Sydney for probably the last 4 or 5 years. And this is why I say it's sort of like a needle on a haystack where, hey, I'll buy an apartment today as a first home buyer, hoping it will grow, and so I can upgrade to a house down the track. So I'm going to give you another example of a certain area where the prices hasn't grown for apartments. So I had a client that approached me about a month ago looking to upgrade the apartment in Parramatta to a house. They purchased this apartment back 3 years ago for about $660,000. We've done 3 valuations with 3 separate banks. And the valuations came back between $650,000 and $680,000. So there was actually no growth in that particular apartment in that area for them to even draw equity out or even sell out a profit to make it easier for them to purchase a house with it. So guys, I'm not trying to say buying an apartment is the worst thing alive, because there's factors involved why you're buying an apartment. And right now, especially in this market, I think affordability is the biggest issue we have, because, well, on one end, I can only afford around, call it $700,000, $800,000 in Sydney. And it's very hard to buy a house in Sydney for that much, unless you want to move out to the west. And for young generations, call it Gen Y, where they work in the city, they maybe don't want to live out in the west and they want to live closer to the city. So they're happy to live in an apartment in the city for lifestyle purposes. But however, I want you first home buyers out there to understand that buying an apartment now and you're hoping to upgrade to a house down the track could make it a little bit harder for you if you're hoping to use the equity from that property. So I actually had this same exact conversation with another pair of clients the other week, where they both live in the inner west, they both live in the city, they love the lifestyle in the city, however, they cannot afford a house in the city where they want to live because houses around there cost around $1.8 to $2 million, where their budget was only around 1.1. So I gave them the option. Look, you can either buy a house out west where there's going to be good growth around the area, you live in it for 2-3 years, capture that capital growth, sell it, then move back in the city, buy an apartment in the city, which probably will cost the same amount of money in 3 years' time, and you can get a smaller loan when you sell and buy an apartment because of the capital gain and the growth from that house. They did consider the big benefits of, hey, potentially just slugging it out for the first 3 years, 4 years, or maybe even 5 years for that capital growth and move back into the city. But however, taking all things into consideration, they prefer to live in the city for lifestyle reasons. Therefore, that's what I'm trying to say. Buying an apartment is not always a bad thing. It's what suits your needs and what does the job for that particular time. So if you haven't had time to read the article from Nila Sweeney from the Financial Review, this is a small breakdown of what she meant in that article and what she meant by the apartment trap. So guys, I hope you like this podcast and I hope you like this video. Please give it a like, give it a follow, and I hope to see you next time. Thanks for joining me on another episode. Take care and see you later.